Okay. So, um, chapter 20. I'm going to see how much we can get done before the end of the semester. But the way things usually have been going for me timing wise, chapter 3, test 3 might just be the final, so we'll see. And again, it's not going to like weigh anything more than a regular test. It's just going to be on the final day. So, let's start with this. Imperialism and Resistance, 1820-1914. So we are getting right up to World War One. Actually, let's see how many chapters before we actually do get to World War One, because I don't recall. Is 21 World War One? No. There's the Mass Society, which leads to World War One, which is chapter 21. 22. Yeah. Okay. So, the book goes over the various waves of European empires, because if anything, Europe really likes to send explorers out and take over lands that don't belong to them and make them part of their empire. So the so-called first wave here is the Americas, obviously North and South America, well, Central America too, especially when it comes to Spain. Spain had a lot going on in Central and South America. These regions became Neo-Europes, which is to say, rather than being colonies for exploitation, which we'll get into, while they were exploitation to begin with, very quickly became just copies of their European motherlands. Canada was called New France for a while. Well, actually, all of what France held, which was, Louisiana. So many of our place names here in America are just new whatever, and that place was somewhere in Europe, oftentimes England, because of where a lot of our stuff comes from. But even then, I mean, we literally have New England. That's a region in the Northeast. So, yeah, but due to the disease that Europeans brought, the natives there were pretty much wiped out. Not just disease, but also, European actions. So they weren't able to make the natives as like subjects of their empire and force them to work. Instead, the colonists would come in, intermarry into whatever population remained, be they native or slave population, creating a Creole mix. That's actually apparently where the word comes from, is a mix of European ancestry and not, I guess. So yeah. However, is cold in here to you? I mean, it's cold to me too. I'm saying my elbows are cold. Um. So after the various revolutions, Haiti, America, obviously, and Iberia, which is just, well, Iberia is where Spain is, but that's just like all the various Spanish colonies rebelled. Um, After 1823, we had the Monroe Doctrine, which I talked about last semester, which was essentially where Europeans would keep their business out of the Western Hemisphere, and America would not bother with European business elsewhere. So, European colonies in, say, Asia, Africa, etc., will be left alone, so long as Europe didn't mess with Central and South America. Because once we, and by we I mean America, gained enough power, we started to force our business on everyone else in at least the Western Hemisphere. So with the East cut off, or the West cut off, uh, Europe began heading eastward, mostly into India and Asia. We'll talk more about Africa in a little bit. And I have this horrific image. The devilfish in Egyptian waters. This is England, as you can see here, holding both the island of Britain, and I think over here I would have expected it to be like Ireland, but I can't tell. Helgoland? I don't know what that's an old name for somewhere else. I don't know exactly what that is. But then it's got all its creepy little human hands on all these various spots around the world. India, Canada, Jamaica, Cyprus, Cape Colony, which we'll talk more about later. Gibraltar, Boerland, which should have been over closer to Cape Colony, but I guess this isn't really an accurate map. Australia, Malta, and then finally, which we'll also get into later this chapter, Britain started getting involved in Egypt once the Suez Canal was being built, because the Suez Canal is like their major artery between Europe and India, rather than having to go all the way around Africa. Speaking of Britain, this is Britain at its height. I think it's Hail Britannia, the British national anthem, that has the line "Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves," etc., etc. But the sun never sets on the British Empire, because no matter where you are in the world, it's always daytime somewhere that Britain owns. Now again, this is diminished over the years, but at the height of the British Empire, they had land in pretty much every time zone, and it was always daytime somewhere in Britain, or British Empire. So the second wave of colonization, after Napoleon was defeated, European powers were exhausted and nearly bankrupt. Britain, of course, being the world leader in the economy, was in the best shape to rebound, and with the world's most powerful navy, rebounded not only the fastest, but quickly became pretty much the world economy. Which again is why even after our second war with England, the War of 1812, immediately we were like, okay, well, let's still be trade buddies, because if not, we have nowhere else to trade. Britain is the world economy. With the British East India Company, and this is a whole thing, they gradually turned India from a number of small trade outposts into what's considered a crown colony. That was not entirely to Britain's advantage, but it was certainly a major part of Britain's eventual empire. So the British East India Company, as you can tell from the name, was a business. They were the main people who ran the ships between Britain and India. However, they were given so much leeway in their handling of India that they pretty much became the de facto government of India, when they were supposed to just be like manning trading posts. And as we're going to see a little bit later on, their handling of India is so poor that eventually India tries to rebel. Britain has to step in officially, and that's when India becomes an official part of Britain, because British East India Company was mistreating this country of, well, I guess at the time, millions, hundreds of millions, which back then was extremely one of the most populous nations in the world. You know, now it's like, what, 2 or 3 billion people in India. France and the Netherlands also began to more formally colonize. Rather than just having trade routes, they began to control just the whole regions. They had a lot of islands in the Pacific, for example, lots of little places that would eventually become part of their overarching empires. And this was the best thing I could get for the British East. Yeah, I can't talk. British East India Company. These are the British East India Company militia troops in Empire Total War. They are the cheap, easy troops that you send out to get shot. But that's who you would have in India. So again, between 1858 to 1914, you had Britain pretty much taking over all of mainland India, and then the regions that remained not fully under British control were still dependent on British rule. So whether they were flying a British flag or not, Britain was in charge. So this is what I was talking about a minute ago. Initially, when the European countries would go out and take land, for the empire, it was for exploitation. They went out to make money. And a lot of times, as I just said with British East India Company, they would let these charter companies take control, take care of trade, and not actually go in and completely take over the region, because if you take over, again, India, a land of hundreds of millions at a time when the world population was probably only a few billion, if you took over, you had to administer that population now, which meant census and building schools and roads and railroads mostly, and like civic buildings, because you had to have government there. With letting the charter companies do it, they just would handle the trading post and make money, and it was much simpler. However, as time went on, colonies became more about prestige. So even after India became part of Britain proper and became a drain on the British soldiers, it was still making more money than it cost to actually run, which was usually pretty rare. Most of the time, if these European countries went in to take over, they ended up spending more money trying to keep the people living there from rising up and overthrowing them than actually taking money from them. So after, I guess you'd say probably the mid-1800s, or the late 1800s especially, since we're talking about Germany and Italy, these nations that had just really formed and were trying to prove that they too were great powers would take countries that were not going to make them any money, just so they can say, hey, we have an empire because we're one of the big guys too. So that's the prestige thing. It's about technically being an empire by having other holdings, even if those other holdings are draining your economy rather than helping it. However, as we're also going to see this chapter, um, the native populations often were not too happy with the Europeans subjugating them and would rise up against them. So rather than the argument being that, oh, we're there to make money, or we're there because it makes us look good, then the argument became, oh, no, wait, we're there to help these people. We're bringing the light of civilization to, quote, the poor backward races. So, yeah, racism became an argument for empire building because we're helping these people who are inferior to us. Look how great we are. So, and I always bring this up whenever I talk about Britain in India. I start with India was a long-term project for the British. The British like to understate things, which is to say, for example, there was a time in British history where Ireland had just finally gained its independence, but there was still a lot of fighting, which resulted in like literally terrorist attacks against British checkpoints. Soldiers were getting killed, civilians were getting killed. They were fighting in the streets. It was really bad. This period of time was simply known as the Troubles by the British. So, yeah, saying India was a long-term project for the British is another understatement because it was the better part of a century, them trying to get India under their control. So yes, as I said, it started with these trading posts, and then gradually the local princes would ally either with the British or the French, because again, I mentioned this before, where France and England were both there, and the princes didn't necessarily all get along, and the group that were fighting this group would ally with whoever was against these other guys. So you had France and England in there working with the various Indian princes. Eventually, the British East India Company had armies that often were full of sepoys, which is to say native Indian troops. I don't think that's a slur. You don't ever hear sepoy outside of like this historical context, at least not to my knowledge. But this conquering of India did not take place under. It wasn't like a British military invasion. They went in, they worked with the princes that wanted to work with them, and the ones that didn't want to work with them, they fought, using troops who were already living there in India. As I said, though, by 1833, the British East India Company did lose its monopoly, and we'll get more into some of the other stuff with that a little bit later. Free trade had been taking over, which we've already talked about as well. So, rather than simply being a monopoly, the British East India Company, as I again got ahead of myself saying because I've taken multiple high-level courses on this, on Britain's dealings in India, they became the government, which, considering how much power corporations have in our government today, just imagine if, like, I don't know, Amazon ran a couple of states. Like, they were in charge. And you paid your taxes to Amazon. And you had to rely on Amazon to pave the roads and treat people fairly. Yeah, wasn't great. Now, part of the British East India Company's mission, besides just taking land in India, was to civilize the Indian natives, both to help them, because again, there was this concept of, you know, the white races are superior, and we have to help these lower races, but also to open these markets to trade, because like with many nations, the vast majority of India's population was very poor. And I mean like living in huts, farming their entire lives, and never progressing economically. Um, so what the British wanted was to civilize the natives of India, so that they could sell them stuff that were being made during the Industrial Revolution. This was something specifically my professor mentioned. It's like, yeah, an Indian farmer, an illiterate Indian farmer living in a grass hut, is going to want to use for example, Singer sewing machine. But if you can move a lot of these people into the cities where they're living in like urban dwellings and they're wearing clothes made in Britain, then they'll want to buy your stupid Singer sewing machine. So a lot of this, quote, civilizing these various people was more to make them a market for European goods, which is wild. There's also another term that, again, I'm not sure if it's a slur. I hope not, because I'm going to use it. The Babus. This was the Indian version of the Creoles, where they were a mixed Anglo-Indian heritage. And they were seen as being more civilized than the native Indians because they were, well, half English, but still not given the same rights as Englishmen. Still, they were a sort of middle class between the ruling English powers and the majority native Indians, to maintain control over India. Because again, India, it's hard to overstate how big India is. Like on the map, it's like, okay, well, it's big, but it's like landmass wise, most of Europe, and population wise, significantly larger than most of Europe. And this was at a time when like the most advanced technology was maybe the telegraph. We'll talk more about South Africa and Cape Colony, and the Dutch farmers already there, known as the Boers. There's a separate war about that, so we'll get into Cape Colony later. Here are the sepoys, just a number of, again, native Indian men who worked for the British East India Company because the British East India Company was working with these princes, so it's just really easy for them to shift over from working for your local prince to working for the company that your local prince works for anyway. We will come back to India. But first, there is the French in Algeria. Now, Algeria is not exactly a crown colony for France. France lost Louisiana due to the Napoleonic Wars and them selling it to the United States. They had lost Canada to Britain back in the 7 Years' War. So France was not in a good place in terms of imperial power. So Algeria, which is like right across the Mediterranean from France, they began the process of taking Algeria in 1827 under the rule of Charles X. It took 3 years to capture the capital, Algiers, which I will show you a map here in just a minute to show you. Like, Algiers is on the coast, and clearly the French sailed in to get there because, again, it's like Algeria's here, and the Mediterranean Sea's there, and France is right there. Like, it's But yeah, it took them 3 years to take Algiers. Um, Louis Philippe tried to conquer the hinterlands, which took the entire time of his reign. And over the course of this attempt to conquer the hinterlands, the French Foreign Legion was created to continue to raise troops. Algeria continued to put up resistance. They were led by Abd al-Qadir, I believe is how that's pronounced. He was defeated in 1847, so again, this is 20 years after they began the process of taking Algeria, when the leader of the resistance was defeated. And then in 1848, the Second Republic made Algeria part of France and gave it representation in the National Assembly, which again, that's basically their Congress. However, only the colons, which is to say the French settlers, the colonizers, were able to vote. So the majority of the population, which is to say the natives living there, who were conquered by the French, had no representation whatsoever. Which, I mean, it's European colonialism. That's not a huge surprise. So real quick here, we have Algeria. And this is the waves of gradual conquest. Algiers, as I said, forgot we're on line. Way up here at the top, like even sticking out a little bit into the Mediterranean Sea. That took 3 years. And then as we go down, we've got the 1830s, 1840 about here, 1870, and then it goes from 1870 about here into like the 1900s. And the final bit of land taken over here was in 1956. So it took them over 27 to 56, 30 years, 130 years to take what is mostly desert. Because again, this is northern Africa. The Sahara is right. The Sahara is right here. And they took 3 years to actually take the capital, and then gradually made their way down, facing resistance the whole way. So yeah, that didn't go well. Actually, it says I don't read French, so I think the frontiers something 1962. So I guess the last final bit of Algeria was taken in 1962, which is even later. Oh, that's wild. Okay. So that's a little bit in India and Africa. We'll obviously be back a little bit later, because the Europeans can't go any further south than here anyway, because once you go south of the Sahara, you start hitting jungle. And the thing about the jungles of Africa is they are full of tropical diseases, as any tropical regions are, but specifically malaria. And Europeans are not good at handling malaria. The people living in Africa, by and large, over thousands, tens of thousands of years, short version, malaria attaches to your red blood cells. It makes it hard for your body to do anything. It will kill you, just plain and simple. However, a lot of people in Africa develop sickle cell anemia, which causes the cell to fold over, which means that their blood isn't working as efficiently as it needs to, as it could, I should say. But it also makes it so that the malaria can't attach to their blood. So they're actually immune to malaria due to this genetic, um, what's that? Sickle cell. It was due to evolution. People who had it didn't die from malaria and then passed it on to their children because it is hereditary. And so most of the people living in sub-Saharan Africa, where malaria is super common, have sickle cell anemia, and therefore, I shouldn't say immune to malaria, but it will not kill them like it would a European. Yes. Well, I mean, it's a bacterial infection, so there's medicine for it. But back then, you would just kill you. Um, it was supposedly in um a wet market where they sell like rather than like when you go to the store and you buy meat, it's already packaged and stuff. There, you just go to the market and you buy the whole thing, and you bring it home and you clean it and do that. Well, for a cow, it'd be like there they don't have cows as much, so it would be like a bat, for example. So you take it home and clean it and cook it. And last I heard, it was a disease that was only because there's a lot of diseases that only spread through certain species of animals. But if it mutates, because it's a virus and viruses mutate all the time, um, then it can become what's the word? Zootropic, I think. Basically, it can go from animal to human. That's what it did. It mutated and it jumped to human. Which is why there's a lot of diseases that are really scary, but they don't affect humans yet. And we're like, we need to make sure we know how to combat this stuff just in case it makes that jump. Well, I mean, the 1918 Spanish flu is, so yes, for sure. Well, I mean, we still have the flu. In fact, the flu still kills like a few thousand people a year. Um, but that's expected. The thing about COVID is we didn't when it started, we didn't know we didn't even know like how it was transmitted. Like, was it 100% sure like the cold where you would just breathe it out and people could catch it? Um, how infectious was it? How deadly was it? I mean, I got it and I can't concentrate like I used to. Like, I've got the brain fog, long COVID symptoms, and there's nothing you can do about that. Yeah, it we're still not 100% sure like what parts of your body it affects. So there could be parts of your body that got damaged that you don't notice yet because you're young and healthy. It could have damaged your immune system. Yeah. I mean, a friend of mine from high school, his father, who was like in his 50s, he just died. He just straight up killed him. And he was in good health. He ate good. But it hit him and it hit his body hard and it killed him. And then his mother was like in the emergency, was like in ICU with it. I couldn't breathe. I remember that. That was scary. Mhm. Mhm. It we're still not sure exactly what all it did is really the main thing about that, and why we're trying to study it, even though certain government organizations are trying to be like, oh well, it's not important anymore and just get rid of it.
Wait, has all the parts of the planet has been like searched, or there's still pieces of it we don't know?
I mean, there's places in the world that we don't go because they're so isolated. Um, there's certain islands where there's like tribes of people there that haven't been contacted by the outside world, and we've decided to leave them alone. Hmm? Hmm. There's a I don't remember the name of the island. There's an island off the coast of India, for example, that's uncontacted, and you're not allowed to go there because they will kill you. They don't want people there.
Do you think there's like animals in the tropics and the world?
Oh yeah, you're discovering animals all the time.
They're
Yeah, it's usually not like a new type of jaguar or something. It's like beetles and worms and stuff.
so it's not like a big animal.
Not usually. Sometimes they do. There's been a couple times they've discovered like a new type of marsupial or a new type of monkey. Um, but not like a rhinoceros or something.
I know there's a lot of stuff in the ocean.
I was gonna say the ocean. Yeah, that's a whole separate thing. Might as well be outer space. Speaking of China, um, so the Opium Wars are one of the biggest examples of imperial overreach, I would say. Um, so to put it as simply as I can, because like this was another topic that I had for like a week plus in my uh, British history or British Empire course when I was doing grad school. Um, the British wanted tea from China, um, and other things, silk and whatnot. But the Chinese, however, only wanted raw currency from Europe because, like, what's Europe gonna trade with China? Textiles, which are at this time made of like wool. They don't want that. They've got silk. You can have silk that's made there in China, or you can buy this crappy stuff from England that's itchy. And I mean, sure, it's warm, but like it, if you're in parts of China where you're wearing silk, it's not ever going to get that cold. And if you're in parts of China that you would like to wear wool, you're not part of the trade system anyway, so you don't matter. So basically, Britain was losing a lot of money to China. Because normally you would send stuff that you're trading, and they would trade stuff in return, and it would have about balanced out. But China only wanted silver, because money spends everywhere. Uh, Britain did find a way to break into the market though with opium. Now opium was illegal in China, but it was legal in Britain, and Britain started smuggling opium into China in huge quantities. Yes. The opioid crisis, where people are basically on painkillers that are so strong they're essentially zombies all day.
Wait a minute. I don't know. When I took my list and stuff out, they made me what's the painkillers called?
Hydrocodone.
It's something like that, right? And I drank one, and it made me want to throw up.
Mm.
Like it gave me like severe nausea, but it was like at first it was like typical painkillers, but then it would make me just throw up. And the only way I'll get rid of the nausea was going to sleep.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's the example I like to use is if you ever read Edgar Allan Poe stuff and you wonder why he wrote like this, it's because he was on opium all the time. Because that was just the norm back then. People smoked opium like, I would say, yeah, you smoke opium.
Oh, it's a plant or something?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
it's like weed?
I mean, it's almost more like cocaine.
So if you grow weed here, do you go to jail?
Uh,
Or your backyard?
depends on where you are, and I think at least here in South Carolina, probably because it's still like only medicinal, and that's still sort of up in the air because we're in South Carolina. If you were in like Colorado, they wouldn't care.
So if you're smoking weed in some states, like you feel like
Yeah,
smoking it, like you're smoking a cigarette.
right. And that's how it was with opium. It's just that was the norm. And not even like people were like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. No, everyone had opium. Um, so they, because China had a powerful or a booming underground opium economy, um, the British basically sent in so much opium that the docks shut down because no one was working because they were high. Like it literally was crashing the economy of China because Britain was sending in so many drugs that all the people were on drugs. So, the Chinese emperor sent Lin Zexu to take care of this. Um, he took all the opium, put it in the warehouses that the British were using, and burned it to the ground. Well, it was on a dock, so it fell into the water. But anyway, destroyed it. And also closed the markets to the British goods because they knew that the British were the ones shipping the opium in. So the British responded by sending in gunboats. Gunboats are not quite battleships, but the 1800s equivalent of a battleship. You know, they're big steel ships with cannons and whatnot. China had not that. China had been pretty much in control of the whole region for the last something like 300 years. So all of their ships were made of like bamboo and balsa wood, and it was like it was like fighting a, I don't know, a tank with a, I don't know, Prius. They had no chance.
So that was an opium war.
Yes, because
So it was fighting her.
no, no, China forced Britain out of their markets because they knew the British were sending in the opium. So the British responded by going to war with China to force it on the country.
I'm pretty sure some people would.
Oh, some people. I mean, like people are high in most wars because like painkillers and stuff. Um. So the Treaty of Nanking, which was set up in 1842, set up treaty ports, which were ports that were technically still under Chinese jurisdiction, but the British pretty much ran the ports. Hong Kong was given to Britain, which it remained until like 1998, I think. And also established extraterritoriality. This is the major sticking point with the First Opium War, is extraterritoriality, which means that the British were not subject to Chinese law. So if, let me rephrase that, when the British sailors docked in China and were, you know, in these coastal towns, and when they accosted the locals, say beating up men, raping women, etc., China couldn't prosecute them. They would only be prosecuted by British law, and considering the British saw the Chinese as subhuman, most of them were never actually convicted of anything. That's what extraterritoriality is. Is you're only subject to the laws in your country, and if your country doesn't respect the people in the country that you're in, you can do whatever you want. And most of them did.
You know how Trump get mad when someone accuses to be a vice citizen?
Mm.
Do you think, let's pretend like I went to North Houston and you killed me? What you think killed me? You know,
I mean, if he can get score political points off of it, then sure. But he doesn't care about anything but himself. Only if only if going to war with that country would make him personally money. You would just be an excuse.
What do you have to do? Like, what if like the social media just start going crazy, like citizens feel that Trump don't have to do something?
Not necessarily. We're only in Iran because we want to take their oil. We only went to Venezuela because we wanted to take their oil.
Wait, I seen on TikTok that they killed somebody in Venezuela, like a leader or something.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We kidnapped him.
Yes. Wait, wasn't he the person who got put in Nike Tech or something like that? Race or something?
Probably.
And then all the women in Venezuela was happy because I'm guessing they were like,
A lot of that was fake. A lot of that was AI. Yeah. I mean, not that the people of Venezuela like really love their leader, but we did just like go in and force a regime change on people that without their consent.
so that was fake.
A lot of it was, yeah. They like using AI to push their.
Wait, so in the video, like the women were happy because they don't have the leader anymore that controls them. Like in Venezuela, like Iran and stuff.
That's Iran. Yeah, we did kill the leader of Iran.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, he's there because we were in there to begin with. The current rulership in Iran is only there because the guy before him, which was a more liberal, somewhat democracy, privatized the oil companies, which meant we didn't make as much money. So we went in, killed him, and replaced him with a guy that we just got rid of. Because they were letting us take their oil, and then he decided that he didn't want to do that anymore, so we went in and killed him. We just murder people over oil.
So if I find some oil in my background, in my backyard,
You,
and I decide to keep it myself, what do you do?
they might send in troops.
And I might send it my truck. Wait, don't we have like a law saying everything on top of the land can be yours and under the land belongs to the government?
I think there is like a depth thing. It depends on where you're at and what the local law is. Yeah, I, it's not like the Beverly Hillbillies where you just get oil and suddenly you're rich. You have to make sure that you immediately get in touch with a lawyer. Because they can just eminent domain it. They can just say, oh, your land belongs to us now.
Oh no, they can't. They could just say that?
Yeah. Well, they will. Yeah. Speaking of people with power doing what they want, the Second Opium War happened. There was a second war where the British, French, Russians, and Americans all went into China to just take more land from them, create more treaty ports. Let's see, legalized opium. So now opium wasn't illegal in China, which was the whole like problem to begin with. Also legalized Christianity, which I'll get more into that in a little bit. And also gave Russia Vladivostok, which was an ice-free port, so they could actually send out ships during the winter. The thing about Christianity being made legal in China, this is something we talk more about in my American history course, but when we don't really talk about it too much in this class. When these imperial forces go out to take over places, like the British have done here, it's much easier if the common citizenry don't want to murder you. So, one of if the China, which again at that time had maybe 1 billion people, again this is back in the 1800s, if the regular people in China don't want you there, it doesn't matter what you do to the government. You can't control the masses. So with Christianity, they send missionaries in who aren't there with guns and ships and cannons, um, to convert the Chinese to Christianity, but also specifically to European ways of thought.
Oh, so they didn't just come and
Oh yeah. So you come in, because Christianity isn't just a religion; it's a culture. Because if you're going to have Chinese Christianity, it's going to be based off of whatever European power came and taught it. So they're not just teaching religion, but also, again, the European mindset. So when the Europeans come in, the people in China who have been converted are like, oh yeah, no, this is fine. Because a big part of Christianity is to get rid of the old traditions, the old religions that they used to have. And that was something that a lot of people used as an identity. And when Europeans come in and tell you, you got to get rid of this stuff, you're going to want to fight back. So the missionary aspect was a softer preliminary strike into these regions to prepare the people for the later waves of colonization.
wait, is Christianity illegal in China?
I don't think it's illegal still. It shouldn't be. It's not the major religion there, but it's not illegal.
Wait, is Christianity illegal somewhere?
Probably like North Korea, because the religion is like the great leader. Kim Jong Un. They're all, yeah. Well, you know how royals are. A lot of inbreeding. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, if you're not part of the Kim royal family, then you're trash. So certainly us non-Koreans. Here is Lin Zexu. He was the counselor who accidentally started the first Opium War by doing his job and getting rid of the opium and telling the British to stop pushing drugs on China. Here we have the British gunships coming in and just sinking the hell out of these poor Chinese. They're called junks. As you can see, there is a major technological difference in this and what are essentially 1800s steel-clad sailing ships with cannons. So yeah, it was a very, very quick war. There's a number of these various images about the Opium Wars. This would be the second one because everyone's getting involved fighting over the corpse of China, here represented by a very racist dragon. So you've got Russia, this is Britain, this is Germany, Austria is the two-headed buzzard because of the dual monarchy. Italy got a wolf, which is nice, because usually Italy is not depicted very kindly. But their symbol is a wolf, by the way, like ours is, of course, the bald eagle. And then Japan got like a leopard, which again is surprisingly nice for how we viewed anyone not European. And then also, I think that's France, the rooster back there. And we have another one here of, once again, a very, very racist looking Chinese man upset at the various European powers, and then also Japan, cutting up the pie, as it were, of China. This is the representation of America. This is Colombia, which is just the female personification. I believe this was Tsar Nicholas. And then they really went cartoony with Queen Victoria and Kaiser Wilhelm. So while obviously a lot to be concerned about here, everybody looks kind of goofy. So, equal opportunity, right? All right. Real quick, Japan, 1853, we sent Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan to require them to open trade with us. And by that, I mean they had gunboats, and this was called gunboat diplomacy, which is to say, hey, you should trade with us, and if you don't, we're going to burn your city down. And that was us. That wasn't Britain. That was America. While this was going on, the Tokugawa shogunate was coming to an end, and the Meiji Restoration was happening. So the Meiji Restoration, that could be its own chapter, if not its own course. The Meiji Restoration was the end of the shogunate, which had been allowing in Westerners into Japan, which a lot of people in Japan felt was weakening the country, and especially when Commodore Matthew Perry comes in with his gunboats and is like, hey, you have to trade with us or we'll burn your city down. So gradually the shogunate was overthrown. This goes all the way back to like the 1300s, I think. They still technically had an emperor, but he was just a figurehead. However, with the Meiji Restoration, they overthrew the shogunate and made the emperor in charge again. That's what all that's about. This is also kind of the end of samurai. So this was like a really, really tumultuous time in Japanese history, and we weren't helping. So in the 1870s, they started borrowing ideas and technologies from Prussia because they saw how quickly Prussia went from this war-torn little state to, by 1891, Germany. So they essentially copied their constitution, took a lot of technologies from Prussia, and made it their own. And so by 1900, Japan was industrialized and kicked Europeans out of its country. It only took them 50 years to go from basically what we saw here. In fact, China was probably more powerful than Japan at this time. From this to able to stand toe-to-toe with the European players, Matthew Perry. He's a rough-looking guy. To be able to kick the Europeans out. But again, just like culturally, this is a really weird time for Japan because, like, oh, we're powerful on the world stage, but also we're having to get rid of a lot of our culture from centuries because of just how fast everything's changing. Okay, let's do one more. So because of the Bering Strait not being very large, they did hold what would eventually become Alaska. They sold it to, I don't remember if the guy was an American, like, senator or just some businessman in America, but they sold Alaska to Americans because it's there on the continent. They don't want it. The closer expansion will be further south towards the Black Sea. And this was something that Russia had been trying to do since Alexander the Great. Not Alexander the Great, wrong great. Alexander the Great is Greek. Peter the Great, which if you recall was like our second chapter in this book. So they've been at this for a couple of hundred years at this point. Peter the Great wasn't able to really get too much done here. Catherine the Great did pretty good pushing south towards the Black Sea. The reason they want the Black Sea is, A, it's not frozen during the winter, because all the water around Russia is frozen during the winter, and you can't send ships out over ice. And also, the Black Sea through the Straits of Dardanelles connects to the Mediterranean Sea, which then itself goes into the rest of the ocean. So they would be able to get out into the rest of pretty much world trade um, any time of the year, which was something that Russia wasn't able to do. And one of the ways that Catherine the Great made this push south was not just military force, because that often resulted in the populace striking back and not wanting people there. So she would strike deals with local rulers. Sometimes she would just redraw maps, be like, "Oh, you've been in Russia. Look at this map that I just drew." So a lot of it was underhanded. A lot of it was political. However, the part we're talking about is the 1800s. We had Mikhail Vorontsov, who was the governor general in the Black Sea, and began an aggressive modernization project. Now, normally, that would be good. They built libraries and schools, which was good for the urban elite. However, in the countryside, they sent the military out to just murder people. If you spoke out against the Russian Empire, you disappeared. And this was before Soviet Russia. Russia's just kind of always been like this.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
So when you know all this stuff, I just want to chat to you about, this stuff. When did like they kill the Jewish people? Like, when is that before this time period or this time?
You mean the Holocaust specifically? That's Germany. That's in the 1940s.
You know what Holocaust means, right? It means like offering,
It's like burnt offering, yeah. No, it was just the most efficient way to get rid of the bodies. Oh, after. This is about 100 years after this. Is the 1930s and 40s. I will try to get there. It's interesting, yeah. In fact, I've got a friend in Denmark, and she and her grandmother just went to Poland and saw Auschwitz, like in person. It's depressing. Yeah. Well, you need to. It needs to. And again, I don't know how long it's going to be before I disappear, because I'm teaching about the parts of history that maybe our government doesn't want us to teach about. So, yeah. Don't do too much, you'll disappear too. me and you end up in a concentration camp. So the Muslims in Saracens, I don't know who those. They're another ethnic group of people in this region. And Dagestan and Chechnya continued to resist the Russians for generations. And this region of Russia, still to this day, is considered one of the most dangerous places in the world, because they are still fighting. They are still, day to day, fighting back against the Russians. And then the Russians send troops in and just like murder civilians. Yeah. Just for the last, well, at this point, almost 200 years. If there's people that have been there and they murdered your grandparents and parents, you're going to hate them. And it's not just wars. I mean, there were ethnic cleansings, which is to say genocide. Multiple wars, again, expulsions where they were just forced out of the region entirely, which leads to a lot of various refugee crises throughout Europe. Here is, let's see. This map's kind of difficult to tell. This is modern day Turkey. So it will be like over here. I've got a better map. Here we are. So Russia into Chechnya, Dagestan. This is Georgia, which I remember when I was either in high school or like the first part of college. Russia invaded Georgia, which again is. Where's the Black Sea on this? Oh, it's up there. Oh, it's here. Sorry, it's all happening like around here. Yeah, the Caspian Sea. So, anyway, Russia doing just like they were doing with Ukraine, invading countries, and the world like, oh, you shouldn't do that, Russia, and then proceeded to do nothing while Russia murdered the civilians and eventually took the region because they wanted it back because they had it during the USSR times and now they want it again. Oh, right. When I was writing this almost 10 years ago, well, no, geez, 10 years ago now? And I was writing about this aggressive, violent governor general in the Black Sea region. I just had to. And this was, again, 10 years ago. This was long before the Ukrainian stuff happened, but he's always been like this. Anyway, there's the actual guy, Bornistov. All right. We do not have time to go over the Sepoy Rebellion because it is a lot. So we will continue that on Wednesday and see how far we get.